Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar podcast, powered by our good friends at Prize Picks and the CLNS Media Network. Back with me on a very, very hectic week, and I very much appreciate him taking time out from all of the work he's going to be doing this week. Paul Dehner Jr. of The Athletic. You know him as one of the very best football writers in America covering the NFL, but specifically your Cincinnati Bengals. Paul, how are you geared up for this week? You ready?
I'm geared up, Trags. I'm geared up. I'm ready. You know, I'm just feeding off fan angst right now. That's my fuel.
Yes.
You know, that's what keeps me going.
You know what they used to say in New England when Pete Carroll was head coach there? You remember the expression?
Pete?
No, that was before Fire Pete in 1999 and before Bill. It was pumped and jacked. I am pumped and jacked.
I am jacked
for this week of free agency. Let's get to the Bengal news first, right out of the chute. Mike Gesicki was introduced formally Monday with a new 3-year, $25 million or $25.5 million contract extension in hand. And the reason I think it's appropriate Mike Gesicki was introduced first is he kind of laid the groundwork for a couple of items, namely the Joe Burrow tax that he mentioned to a question that you asked, as a matter of fact, and how much he appreciates playing with Joe. And what were your biggest takeaways from Joe Burrow's role in Mike Gesicki coming back to the Bengals? And what kind of piece of the pie is Mike Gesicki in the overall Bengals offense?
Yeah, I think he's an important piece, you know, specifically when you start playing the better teams, the better defenses, and you need more than just, hey, two really good receivers. You need that extra punch. And I think they really, once they got into the second half of last season, later in the season, I think really figured out how to kind of properly unlock Mike Gesicki in this offense and how he fits. Because before that, he was productive when T was out. I mean, when T was hurt, it was nice to have him, and you need that. I think he's kind of like a two-pronged T. Higgins package where he fits perfectly into the one weakness you're concerned about with T. Higgins, which is the nagging soft tissue stuff that can keep him out for a couple of weeks. Well, if you can turn to Gesicki and the offense just keeps going like it did this past year, kind of offsets that problem. And then if you figure out the way to use him like they did, where when teams are doubling up on Jamar and T, you can get Mike Gesicki one-on-one on a safety, or you can take advantage of teams that have maybe undersized slots and use his height and Joe Burrow's accuracy to an advantage. And you saw that really play out late in the season. They figured out how to use him and what kind of a weapon he can be for them specifically, even though he's not really a tight end. He's basically just a receiver. A joker weapon is like the new thing that people are talking about now. Just a weapon out there that they can use in the passing game and a really nice fit. And in terms of Joe, I mean, having the impact, I loved him referencing the meme when Joe Burrow is talking about him on the Super Bowl rounds, and I'm literally sitting on my couch like that meme, like me. I think he said Mike G. I think that's me. I think he's talking about me. Just surprised, you know. He's like, yeah, he hadn't talked to Joe about it. He hadn't sat there and said, hey, Joe's going to be out here. You're going to hear him talking my name out there. No, it just sort of happens, and it's the power of Joe and the power of sort of understanding what he wants and how to try to make that happen. I think there's a pretty good chance Gesicki happens either way, but I think the way he was able to build chemistry with Joe on the field and knowing how to use that going forward ended up being what put it over the top for them being willing to, you know, spend a decent amount of money on that position and somebody in their 30s.
Well, and also, I don't know if they necessarily look at it this way, or maybe they do based on what you just referenced. He's sort of a T. Higgins insurance policy if they don't sign T, or, you know, if something happens with T. Higgins, whether they were to trade him, whether they were to sign him long-term, which is obviously the hope. But he is at least somebody in that role who could fulfill what would be a void if T. Higgins weren't on the field.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they're screwed if T. Higgins isn't here. and they only have Gesicki. But I think as a complement, as a piece that goes with it, he makes a ton of sense. And it's Burrow makes it look so easy in terms of making these tight ends be productive every year. But I think there was a little extra juice to what Gesicki was providing in terms of that. And I think they recognized that wouldn't be as easy to just stick back in the carousel and churn out the next one, especially with a free agent class that was weak at the position. Gesicki being kind of the premier guy there. And then you don't want to be dependent on, some rookie tight end that just when you have something good, that it's good. It's a big part of what's setting your offense apart. Invest in it. And they need to do that in other places still too.
Reports are out there now as we move on to other Bengal news that B.J. Hill will be back in the fold. 3 years for $33 million with, I believe, $16 million guaranteed, Paul. $33 million over 3 years seems like a pretty heavy price tag for defensive interior lineman that didn't get to the quarterback that much. And, I think they would like a little bit more production out of B.J. Hill. I think the idea is you get B.J. Hill as a foundational piece or a rotational piece, however they view him. And perhaps with more support around him, he can be more productive and get more juice getting to the quarterback. What do you think?
Yeah. I think BJ kind of was himself this past year and still has. He's very much, he's like a floor piece, where he sets the floor. You're going to get a solid, sustainable level of play from that position. He's not going to, light up the highlight reel all that often. I mean, he was second on the team in pressures, but I don't know how impressive that is with 32 last year via PFF, but I think he's consistent, and he's the type of player that you hope that players will be better than. You hope that Chris Jenkins develops to be better than B.J.
Right.
Hill. But if you have B.J. Hill, I do think it's a solid level of play. I'll be really curious to see the true structure of the deal. That 16 guaranteed is an important piece there, because when you're signing somebody who's turning 30 next month, you're probably looking more at I'm going to guess, just by hearing 16 guaranteed, it's probably 2, and then we'll see on the back end of that contract. And Gesicki's is kind of like that too. And so I think that if you have that, then that's good. He's transitional. He's a bridge to you figuring it out, because it's just so hard to get defensive linemen, defensive tackles to come in and immediately be big time impact. It just takes time. We're seeing that across the league right now. You can't just immediately get that. And so they're going to need time to develop whoever they draft this year, and maybe even more time for a guy like Jenkins to develop behind him. And so BJ Hill gives you that floor level that you need. But you're right. They need more. They need better around him. He was fine. He's fine as a piece when he's maybe your third or fourth best defensive lineman. I don't think you have as much of a problem with that. You do have a problem when you're counting on him to be a guy carrying your interior pressure, which they had to do too much last year.
I think, the issue, and this isn't really breaking news, but I think it bears repeating, Paul, that the Bengals need to do a better job of developing, especially on the defensive line, because you are spending, let's say the $11 million a year on a guy like B.J. Hill. Well, at some point, you're going to have these draft picks come up and be more productive, whether it's McKinley Jackson or Chris Jenkins Jr., like you said. And it's almost certain that they're going to be drafting, I would say, 2 defensive interior linemen, maybe an edge, maybe a defensive interior. At least they'll draft 2 of them and then get what they get perhaps later this week in free agency. But one way or another, they've got to be adding. I've felt all along at least 2 edges and at least 2 interior linemen. That's 4 in total between the draft and free agency.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, when a draft that's so deep in that, you got to assume that you're going to be able to take advantage and get one of each there. Now, whatever happens in free agency, it's a lot harder to predict actually this year. The draft tends to be unpredictable. Not as much this year at that position, but I do think free agency we'll see what they end up getting. But it's not bringing back BJ Hill isn't the most exciting thing, and I think some of us assumed they would move on. That it would feel more like a rebuild, with just new faces. But when Al Golden goes and looks at what's available and compares that to what's out there and the unknown of it, I think it's very possible to see like, hey, they're still good in these guys. It's just a matter of picking your spots to build with outside pieces where you have to. But obviously, they're not going to go out there and go crazy with a whole bunch of new players right now. Maybe they still do, but bringing back BJ Hill, bringing back Gesicki, whatever they're going to do, maybe Osai still comes back. That feels like, a little bit of still believing that some of what was wrong was not about the players last year.
I'm glad you mentioned Joseph Osai, because I have felt ever since the end of last year that he was starting to peak, kind of like he was in 2022 when he got healthy. And then we all know what happened in the AFC Championship game. Actually, before that play in the AFC Championship game, he was having a tremendous game. And I felt toward, I'd say, the last month of the season this past year that Osai was kind of reaching that potential, and he's still in his mid-20s. And he could be a guy they get relatively cheap in the free agents process, bringing back one of your own. I think he could be a very valuable piece going forward, again, if you have the right people building around him.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't as sold on what Osai was doing later in the year. I like, I think they love his relentless play style, and that fits what they want. But he's not a quick winner. Like he's not just dominating. His pressure rates aren't going to be like an impressive number, but he chases and he plays hard and he's sideline to sideline and he's got a motor, and that sells. I mean, that is part of what you're selling. You're hoping that maybe you can get more quick winning out of him. But I think he's a solid. You're fine. To me, I'm fine with Joseph Osai as my 3 or 4. You know what I mean? And have him come in spots, have him kick inside, have him be there in a game where guys are hurt, where you need him. But I don't want to have to be dependent on him, as being a dude and taking a big leap. Maybe it happens. I hope for his sake that it does happen for him. But I don't know that I see that.
And I would obviously add that the context of that conversation totally changes based on what the Bengals are able to do or not do in the first probably 4 or 5 days of free agency. He is Paul Dehner Jr., does a fabulous job covering the Bengals for The Athletic. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions, that's billions with a B, of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just need to pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. On Prize Picks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports. Combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. Prize Picks offers Venmo, Apple Pay, MasterCard, and more for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Don't miss your chance to cash in as the league's best fight for playoff positioning rolls on. The second half of the basketball season is here, and the race to the playoffs is heating up on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. Download the app today and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use that code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Back with Paul Dehner Jr. on the Jungle Roar podcast. All right, Paul, let's get to the 100,000 pound, or maybe we should probably call it more like the, let's do some quick math. What's 160 plus 260 million pound gorilla in the room? The contract status of T. Higgins.
It's a big gorilla.
And yeah, it is. And Joe and Jamar Chase. What happened over the weekend? I want to get your opinion on this first. With the trade of DK, first of all, Myles Garrett coming back off his trade demand, and then, of course, the Cleveland Browns going out and making him, for now, the highest non-quarterback paid player in the National Football League. 4 years, $40 million average annual value per year. And then with the Pittsburgh Steelers trading a second-round pick this draft to the Seattle Seahawks, getting in return DK Metcalf. Apparently they outbid the New England Patriots for DK Metcalf's services. And then they extend DK Metcalf, and he's going to be making, over a 4-year period, $33.5 million. That second deal, I think more than the first deal, impacts the Bengals because of what it means for T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, it's just a little bit extra that they're going to have to do, that they're going to have to a little extra tax that they're going to have to pay for waiting, which just keeps building and building at this point. I felt like 40, maybe that was a place that they were thinking they might not have to go with Jamar, and now they have to, but I don't know that it's that big of a difference. They probably recognize it's probably a place they were going to have to go when you consider the season he was on and how close they maybe were to that. You're right. The T thing makes it a little bit more difficult because it's easier for his agent to come back and say, oh, the price changed again, just when you thought maybe you were close or going to get what you wanted. And now you got to go back to the table and figure that back out again. It's impactful, but I feel the same way, though, Trags, about this that I have for a while. It just gets done. It maybe made it hard. Maybe it adds some days, maybe a week, whatever. Maybe it makes it a little bit more bitter towards the end. I don't know. I just think it gets done. Everybody wants it done. They're building the whole thing around it getting done. I just think they end up there with T and whatever that number ends up being. And it's not really an overpay anymore. Everybody's got plenty of money. The cap is wide open, and so we'll see what happens with it. I've just had that feeling about T the whole time that it'll get done just because that's what everybody wants, and they'll find the spot.
So with the guaranteed money on Myles Garrett, I believe it's $122.8 million. That impacts the Jamar deal because he's going to want more guaranteed than Myles Garrett. No? Or
maybe.
Or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously they've been working under a structure or a framework, shall we say?
Framework, yes. We love that Duke Tobin
We
line
love
at
frameworks.
the combine.
I think they've been working under a guaranteed percentage framework probably here for a while now on this. So I don't know how much that changes that. I still think they're kind of working off the Jefferson deal in terms of, which was a big guarantee as well. So if they found their way past that to get closer to knowing what it's supposed to look like, I don't know that the Garrett guarantee changes that. I just think it's a matter of them just figuring out what that looks like in terms of upfront cash or guarantees or whatever. For them to get as close as they maybe are getting now and be in those conversations, I would assume that they know that they have some obstacles to get over in the guarantees and are trying to figure that out.
How much hand-wringing happens? And I'm asking you to totally guess here. I understand that and get a feel for what you sense inside the organization. How much hand-wringing is there when the Bengals look back and say, yeah, probably we could have gotten Jamar done last year if we were more aggressive. Yeah, maybe we should have done T. Higgins earlier, and maybe we should have saved ourselves. I'm going to throw the number out there, $30 million.
Yeah.
How much hand-wringing is there over that?
Some, but I feel like they believe in their philosophy. And so if you're asking me if they're doing hand-wringing, I don't know how much hand-wringing they're doing. They like the information. They like knowing that they're investing in a player with as many years of information as they can get. I mean,
even if it costs them in the end run more money. See, that's what I guess.
Sometimes it saves.
Doesn't make sense to me.
I'm trying to tell you why I don't feel like they're hand-wringing. I'm not saying that I'm on this.
Right. Understood.
Yeah, I'm just saying their thought is sometimes you think you're going to make a big investment in somebody, and then when you have another year of information, there's an injury, there's a dip in performance, something changes with them, and it's not the same. And so I just from my seat watching them over the years do this, they typically just seem to really like information with their biggest cards that they're playing. Like that's and sometimes they have to eat it. And they're eating it now because of what happened with Jamar, and now the need to go back to T. I think thing was it changed to where now all of a sudden they got back into the T business. I think they thought they were out of the T business.
Right.
And so that they're eating that now because of bad draft picks, because of not being able to find anybody. You know, the Burton pick really hurts you at this point. And not getting more to be able to move on to, and other guys that you're not going to be able to pay. There's a lot of things that I think led them that. So I don't necessarily hold them against like they were purposely, because I don't think they thought that was where they were going to end up here. I didn't think they thought that they were going to have to get back into extending T, but then a lot of things changed and Joe Burrow's voice got louder, and here you are. So I think the Jamar thing is the big one, but they like the information, they like waiting, and they feel like that's kind of the precedent that there has been with these top picks and entering fifth-year options, and it was until last year we saw some teams try to get in ahead of Justin Jefferson. Well, Jamar wanted no part of getting in ahead of Justin Jefferson. We know that. So once it went to there, you know, the fact that we were even talking about it in camp was actually a surprise, because it felt all along like they wanted to wait, and they eventually did.
See, now I'm going to contrast that with one of the moves that I think made them, or actually two of them. The initial free agent signing of Trey Hendrickson to me, and I wrote this last week for CLNS Cincy.com. I think the Trey Hendrickson deal has the potential of going down as one of their very best free agent signings.
Yeah.
Given his
you know what the current anger of the fan base about a lot of guys reminds me of when people were so pissed they let Carl Lawson walk for some dude named Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah.
No, that was that. I mean, I remember that. I remember the outrage of how could you let Carl Lawson go, and the pressures and everything he was, and you're betting on some Hendrickson guy. Like that was exactly what it was. And let's not pretend otherwise. Well, these things have to play themselves out. You gotta bet on your own evaluation. And they haven't hit on all their evaluations, which brings the frustration louder. But like, you can't just hold on to guys just because they've been great here, just because fans like them. And sometimes it makes sense, but not always. And it'll all come to the forefront in the fall. And you'll learn if you made the right decisions or not. And they have to live by that, not what fans are screaming into the abyss, worrying about what's happening. They have to do what's best for the team to try to win.
Yeah. Not only the initial free agent signing of Trey Hendrickson, the extension of Trey Hendrickson, both of those were very savvy moves. And in extending Trey Hendrickson, they sort of got out in front of it, right, Paul? I mean, that's essentially what that move was done to do, and save some cap space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they were thinking that I'm sure he won't sign this, right? Like, just try. I mean, from Trey's perspective, it didn't make much sense. He wouldn't be in this spot right now. He'd have been in free agency, making a boatload of cash somewhere. But he wanted a new deal, and he signed it, and so that was a savvy move by the Bengals, and to get him to accept that and get the one extra year out of him, and maybe who knows what happens after this. But I think he doesn't like it, but they have handled it, and they have created for themselves one of the best bargains in football over the course of his time in Cincinnati. No question.
Right. And that is, like you said earlier, that is the give and take of, I guess, the way the Blackburns and the Browns look at this. Sometimes we're going to hit on this like we did with Trey Hendrickson. Sometimes it's going to cost us, like it will with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and that's the business of football. And they say one thing for the Brown and Blackburn family: no family blocks out the noise or appears oblivious to the noise. by not talking to us, but still, they seem so oblivious to it. They're just going to keep doing business the way they do business.
Mike is the same to the end. He is winning will silence them, and we need to do whatever they believe internally matters to win. That has been his message and thought process through a number of different controversial topics and eras. Whether it was signing players with troubled pasts, whether it is letting guys go, and that maybe that's unpopular, or re-signing certain players, or handling losing seasons, sticking with coaches, like all of that is because their philosophy is whatever it is to win is all that matters. They're not going to be influenced by what people are screaming and yelling about. And so people have every right to, and they probably listen to it a lot more than they used to. Certainly the girls do. When you talk about Caroline and Elizabeth, they're very much in touch with what is being said about the Bengals and have done a good job of bridging the gap of that and helping fans feel a little more heard. But when it comes to the football team, that philosophy goes down throughout. They're not going to be swayed by what people maybe feel to be, something they don't like.
I'm going to wrap up with this, and it was a story that you did last week, and I loved it. And I loved it because it sets up different scenarios once the Brown family did acknowledge and the Blackburn family did grant Trey Hendrickson his request to go out and seek a trade. You went out and proposed your own mock trade scenario for Trey Hendrickson.
Did
you like doing
things.
that?
I love mock things.
Apparently.
I actually
really did
like
a great job.
I actually like the trade. I like the trade scenario thing because it's a good chance to dip into what teams really would be interested. Our writers at The Athletic are so in touch with what's going on with each team. They know if a team would be willing to do it or be desperate enough to do it. And so you get a feel for, is there a big market? Is there a small market? How many teams would actually be feeling desperate enough? And 5 writers sent something back and sent in offers. And it helps. I think it helped to have a feel for what the market really is. And you can kind of get a feel for what it could have been, what it is for Hendrickson right now and what they're sifting through.
I like the Washington and Indianapolis scenarios. Can you go over those real quick and why you eventually settled on what you did?
Yeah, so there were essentially a couple. There were the Bears too were in there offering 41 overall straight up. The Colts were offering 45 and third the next year, and then the Commanders were offering 29, but it was part of a pick swap, giving up 49. And Jonathan Allen at that time, I think, was a part of the deal. And there was a pick.
I loved what you said about Jonathan Allen, and it kind of hit home with me. I didn't look at it that way, but it was a fabulous point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and when you look at what you're getting, I felt like they need now. And so people offering picks next year being a part of a package wasn't as sweet of a spice as maybe they thought it was, because the Bengals need to get into the rebuilding of the defensive line quicker and because they're trying to turn it around. So I just felt like if you can get it's nice to have that throw in, but anything you can get into the middle of this round is good. And something like Jonathan Allen, you're not going to be wanting to pay that money to him. That you might as well keep on Trey Hendrickson at that point for the same number.
Right. And I think, I think your point on Jonathan Allen is you have kind of a potential. You have a lot of potential there, but you need to get it out of him. And you already have a player like that in Myles Murphy, right?
Who knows what's going to happen with Myles Murphy? That's another.
That's a huge X factor.
That's another big question right there. I think there's a lot of hope for Myles Murphy right now inside of that building. Obviously, they feel that way. They think that more snaps will be enough. But I think they have to make that bet on him. He's shown enough in their eyes to believe that he still can develop and become the guy they want him to be, and they have to bet on that. And the only way they can bet on that is with snaps, and they got to keep him clear to go play.
For the record, by the way, you had the Bengals taking the Indianapolis Colts deal in that.
Yes.
That's the one you went with
Yes.
Lou Anarumo.
Lou Anarumo coming, but yeah, it was 45 and then a third the next year.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. He is Paul Dehner Jr. You can follow his stuff on The Athletic. Does great work for the Cincinnati Bengals, has for years and years and years. He is a must follow this busy week of free agency as it opens around the National Football League. Paul, you're a good friend, and thank you for taking time out during a very busy week. As we always like to say, for Prize Picks and CLNS Media, and as Paul Dehner Jr. just reminded me, until next time, keep that jungle roaring.